And we're here today with Forrest Jack Bowman, and I'll provide you with a brief introduction about Forrest. Born in 1938, Forrest Jack Bowman grew up in the aftermath of World War II and spent his youth fascinated by what men and women in wartime or otherwise do when faced with sudden, unexpected danger. He has practiced law, including defending 2 cases in the Army where his clients faced the death penalty, traveled behind the Iron Curtain in the mid-1960s, where he had an encounter with an East German spy, and taught law for 23 years, where he garnered numerous prizes for his teaching. But his first love is writing stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when faced with great peril. His characters are not fearless and possess no supernormal skills or abilities, but they face their fears and dangers head-on with guts and quick thinking. Jack's love of history shows up repeatedly when his modern-day characters use old clues to solve today's puzzles. And Jack is also a former chairman of the Kanawha County Public Library Board. And Jack, we're very glad that you could be here with us this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. It's really a pleasure to be here. The title of the program, of course, is It's Never Too Late, How to Write a Treasure Hunting Novel When You're Almost as Old as the Treasure. I published this novel in the fall of 2018 when I was 6 months past my 80th birthday. But as we're going to see later, it really began years before that. Still, it's basically the effort of a man in his late 70s who was still working but had a story he wanted to tell. Without sounding too much like a retired 82-year-old law professor, here's the background of my novel, The Secret of the 48th Foot. Now, what I'm about to tell you is true. I mean, it's a novel, but the beginning is actually true. And I'll tell you when my storytelling begins. The French and Indian War, which lasted from 1754 to 1763, pitted the British and French colonies in North America against each other, with each side supported by military units from the old countries. And since they both had colonies in North America, they both wanted to settle in the Ohio River Valley and trade with Native Americans. Wherever they went, the French at first came down from Canada, and they constructed forts wherever they went. In 1754, they built a fort called Fort Duquesne at the merger of the Monongahela and the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers, where Pittsburgh's now formed. This was the gateway. This was the key to the West, and the British had to have it. So in 1755, they sent Major General Edward Braddock to Virginia to take command of the American forces in North America. Braddock was about 60. He was a short, stout, bad-tempered little martinet, no combat experience, although he spent his entire adult life in the British Army. He had 2 regiments of regular British soldiers sent over from the Irish garrison. They were the 44th and the 48th Infantry Regiments. The British have always called their infantry regiments foot regiments instead of infantry units like we do. So instead of being the 44th, the 48th Infantry Regiments, these 2 units were simply the 44th and the 48th Foot. So the title of my book, The Secret of the 48th Foot, is essentially about a secret of the 48th British Infantry Regiment. They were a mixed lot of troops, and many of Braddock's officers were pretty mediocre. Back in those days, you could buy a commission. So you could be a colonel if you had enough money, but no experience. Fortunately, Braddock had a young colonial colonel on his staff, George Washington, who volunteered to serve as an aide-de-camp. And while the British tended to look down on colonial officers, the record reflects that Braddock really thought pretty highly of Washington, and he very often asked for his advice. The plan was for the British to gather and erect a fort at what is now Cumberland, Maryland. In fact, the site they picked is now a hilltop known as Fort Cumberland, Fort Hill High School. From Fort Cumberland, Braddock had to cross 125 miles of wilderness and assault the French at Fort Duquesne. Now, the people who set this all up had fought wars in Britain and on the continent, and they knew nothing about what Braddock had to cross that 125 miles. Before leaving Cumberland, Braddock sent Washington to the colonial capital of Williamsburg and asked him to get a chest of gold and silver coins to pay the troops when they took Fort Duquesne, which was a certainty. They were going to take Fort Duquesne. And this is the treasure chest that is at the heart of my novel. Well, after months of preparation, they finally left Fort Washington, and Braddock and his men created a 12-foot wide wagon road that became one of the major routes to the West in later years. In fact, Braddock's Road helped, Braddock, your battery's running low. Is that me? I'm plugged in. Braddock's Road helps shift the center of gravity in the Atlantic seaboard to the continental interior. In fact, you can still see signs of Braddock's Road if you go to Savage Mountain in Maryland or just outside Fort Necessity along Route 40. Well, after 4 weeks of slow moving, they finally reached what was then known as Beesontown, and it's now called Uniontown. There, Braddock divided his army in two. He left the wagons and the heavy equipment under the command of Colonel Dunbar with the 48th Foot. And among the items he left with Dunbar in the 48th Foot was a pay chest of gold and silver coins. Having left the equipment and supplies that were slowing him down, Braddock left Beesontown with what the military called a flying column. He was going to go over and defeat the French at Fort Duquesne. On July 9th, 1755, at the site of what's now the town of North Braddock, Pennsylvania, 9 or 10 miles from Pittsburgh, Braddock's command had just crossed the Monongahela River, and they were surprised by a force of 600 to 700 Native American warriors and 254 French Marines and militiamen. The Indians dashed down both sides, both flanks of the British Army, and the French blocked the front, became a killing ground. In fact, 2 out of 3 of every British officers who were there that day were either killed or wounded. Braddock, Washington, and the surviving officers tried to rally the troops. Washington's hat was taken off his head by a bullet. He had bullet holes through his coat. Braddock was shot in the chest. Well, Washington put Braddock on a cart, got somebody to carry him across, and then he tried to gather the troops together. But the troops decided that they were defeated and they ran, and Braddock and Washington couldn't keep them together. They then, at that point, the British retreated, ran in panic back toward Beesontown, and the Indians, instead of chasing them, as the British assumed would happen, and assumed was happening, the British lingered to scalp the dead and the wounded before taking a dozen prisoners off to Fort Duquesne. Grisly side effect, that night they gleefully burned these prisoners alive along the Monongahela River, somewhere about where the bridge comes out into modern-day Pittsburgh. Anyway, there was no retreat. There was no organized pursuit beyond the river crossing by the French or their Indian allies. Native Americans' practice in those days was that they destroy the enemy, then stop and collect the plunder. And they did not follow the panicked British. As you can imagine, the field of battle was littered with weapons, clothing, and supplies. In fact, the French made a detailed record of what had been picked up on the battlefield, and more about this later. Meanwhile, Braddock ordered Washington back to Beesontown and told Colonel Dunbar there to destroy everything that the British might use and get back to Fort Cumberland, assuming still that the French and Indians were following, which they were not. That night, as Colonel Dunbar, as his men were destroying the wagons and cannons and anything else the French might use, gave the pay chest of gold and silver coins to 3 soldiers. It's all true. Put it on the back of the chest on the back of a horse and took off with instructions to get to Fort Cumberland with it. The pay chest never made it back to Fort Cumberland. Several days after the battle, one of the 3 soldiers who'd been assigned the chest staggered, and that's the correct verb, Fort Cumberland. And in his delirium, he told about having been chased by Indians, his 2 comrades killed, and that he had buried the chest at the confluence of 2 streams. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the French made a detailed record of what they'd picked up on the battlefield, and they made no mention of the chest of gold and silver, and certainly they would have brayed about it across Europe had they picked it up. Where's the chest today? Well, I think clearly it's out there somewhere in the wilderness between Pittsburgh and Cumberland at the confluence of 2 streams. where if it's ever found, I'm convinced it's going to be a matter of blind, staggering luck. This completes the true part of Braddock's defeat and the lost pay chest. This much of my novel is true. The rest is pure Jack Bowman story. In my novel, my yarn or tall tale follows a couple of modern day WU professors who've received a cryptic message from a student who's been mysteriously murdered. What follows is a life and death struggle through West Virginia and Western Maryland as the two professors follow more clues from the murdered student, dig into battle reports, old maps, and even the diary of George Washington in an increasingly dangerous effort to locate the treasure and stay alive, because a nasty group of cutthroat militiamen are also in on the hunt for the treasure. They want to fund their effort to overthrow Zog, the Zionist occupation government, which is their name for the USA. They've threatened to kill anyone who gets in the way. So that's the gist of the story. And I don't want to tell anymore because I don't want to ruin the tale for those of you who have not read it. But I'm going to open it for questions now. I'll start with the question, the most common question I get. Then you may be sending in your questions. Where did I get the idea for the novel? Well, on July 10th, 1955, one day after the 200th anniversary of Braddock's defeat, I was a rising senior in Petersburg High School. So at age 82, that says some years back, I read a brief piece in the Cumberland Sunday Times about the missing pay chest book. I kept that clipping for years. And since that time, I've read everything I could find about the Braddock expedition. In fact, this gives you, by the way, a little insight on what kind of a nerdy kid I was, that I could get caught up in such a story. Anyway, as for how I came up with my plot involving the two professors, I couldn't begin to tell you. I've worked on it over the years, and it just seemed to flow from somewhere. The book has gone through several iterations over the years that were substantially different from the final versions. But where all the plotting came from, I don't know. In an earlier version, I had a guy named Jerry whose car was rigged and he was killed, and the guy reached up inside the car to grab a briefcase. So to this day, my two grown sons call this book Jerry's Briefcase, but it's simply a tale that I somehow came up with. What I wanted to do was tell a story of two ordinary people who were caught up in a nightmare scheme involving a treasure chest where their lives were in danger. So many of the thrillers we read involve people who are trained assassins, or who are great with guns, or who have connections with the CIA. They can get anybody's phone tapped, or they can have the street lights turned off on a certain street in Philadelphia at their request, so that sort of thing. I wanted somebody with, just like most of us, nothing like this. They had none of that. And they simply use their innate common sense, their guts, take charge attitude, fake documents, aggressive moves. They take charge, clever disguises, and they're out there on their way, trying to stay alive and trying to find the treasure. What are your questions?
Looks like we had a question from Anita. Did you have any particular people in mind who the hero and heroine are fashioned on?
No, I didn't. I'm asked that very often, with one exception. I didn't model anybody in the book after anyone real. The exception was the minister who married Ben and Julia was modeled after Dr. Joe Gluck. Many of you went to Western University know Joe Gluck. For 3+ decades, he was a Baptist minister who was also dean of men at West Virginia University during the 40s and 50s and 60s. He was the only character in the novel after whom I modeled a real character. I'm often asked, after whom did you model Julia? You know, she's a hot little number, and everybody's asked me about Julia. She wasn't modeled after anyone I knew, but I kept getting pressed about that, and I told a friend of mine that I'd modeled her after his wife. That didn't go over well. But other folks who have read the book have said, oh, wait a minute. Ben, the lead male character, has prematurely white hair. Didn't he model after you? And the answer is no, with one exception. When I put on a cap, ball cap, I become unrecognizable. I can go to a football game and I'm walking up the ramp and I can run into a good friend and I'll say, "Hey, Bill, how are you?" And they say, "Oh, I didn't recognize you." Putting on a cap is a disguise for me. And I did that with Ben in the book because that really happens. But Ben and I are not alike. He was a high school athlete, an airborne ranger, a tough guy on the wrong side of the tracks. We had nothing else in common except our love of history. What else?
We also had another question from A. Haight. How much did your story change from your first version to the published version?
Probably about 70%. I didn't, a lot of what I did at first didn't fit, didn't work. And I probably had a turnover of about 70%. It just, as I say, my boys still refer to it jokingly as Jerry's briefcase. And one of my sons, who's a film graduate, is working on a film script. And he'll say, "Well, I've got Jerry's briefcase about done," that sort of thing. But it was about 70%. The names changed. Where the names came from, God alone knows. I did have an idea at one time of doing something with the names. Torini, Ben Torini, that's an Italian background, but doesn't look Italian. And Julia's a wasp, but darker complexion. It could be Italian, but I never did anything with that. But where their names came from, I don't know. I looked through phone books. The hardest part of writing the book was, it's going to sound silly, they'll be writing it. The problem I had early on was I had written 5 or 6 chapters, and I'm going to write chapter 7 now. And I would sit down, and before I wrote chapter 7, I would sit down and read chapters 1 through 6 again. And I'd start polishing it. By the time I'm ready to go to bed, suddenly I polish and I haven't gotten to chapter 7. So I finally had to decide just to go ahead and write and polish all my chapters later. I had a big surprise in the process of writing it, which apparently is not at all unusual. I had 2 characters, I won't tell who they are, but 2 characters who walked into the book. I outlined the book, and I knew where I was going. I knew roughly where I was going to end, how I was going to end. But I had 2 characters who simply showed up, became major characters in the book. Now, years before, I had written a book, my first novel actually, involved the Lincoln.
Sorry, everyone. I think we may have lost Jack. We'll give him just a few minutes to get reconnected here.
It's hard to say. Years ago, I had started writing a novel, and I had a situation where I had a Union soldier who was going into a store in Southern Maryland. It was bitter cold out, and he wanted to spend the night. And the store owner said, "Well, I can't. My Confederate leaning friends won't approve." So he's leaving, and in the back I hear a woman's voice saying, "Paul, I wouldn't send a dog out on a night like this." And suddenly I had a new character walk into the book right out of nowhere, and that happened in this book twice. I had 2 characters who simply walked in. Hadn't been planned on, and they were there, and they became major characters. Any other questions?
We had a question from Kathy, and Kathy wants to know, what was your writing routine?
Erratic. I wrote this in the evening. I was still working. I wrote this in the evening and on weekends. but it was somewhat erratic. I wrote at my computer because I typed faster than I could write, but I followed my outline, and I had to do a lot of research at times, and I'd peel that in. But basically, so say I tried to write in the evenings and to go from there, and that worked out pretty well. I had to do some research. I said I had to have all the details of Braddock's defeat. I knew about Washington's trip to Uniontown in 1784 after he was after the Revolutionary War, and I tied his diary in with this. When he came west on that experience, on that trip, he had a group with him. There were, I think, about 8 of them, and suddenly, after meeting with a Captain Hardin in Beesontown, he and his nephew, Bushrod Washington, took off cross country alone. Let everybody else go back by Braddock's Road. They took off cross country alone, where they were particularly interested in streams. And I was able to bring that into the book. That actually happened, but I was able to bring that fact to the book. I had to research the pistols. Remember, they had a pistol that showed up, and then it's the same 9mm, and I just assumed, well, we could use all the rounds. But as a matter of fact, I found out you couldn't use the same rounds in both 9mm pistols. I used some topographic maps to find out where Ben and Julia might have looked for the treasure. And finally, I had to find a way to kill Tina Bass, the receptionist in the prosecuting attorney's office, by severing her spinal cord. I want to make it a matter of official record that I've never killed anyone. And I had to research this, and it's purely made up. I need to have that very clear. I started the book before I left Charleston 41 years ago. But again, as I say, the book was really written in my late 70s here in Morgantown. Other questions?
Rebecca wants to know, when can we expect your next novel?
My wife is in the back here laughing. That's a good question. I'm really having trouble. I wanted to follow up with Ben and Julia. But the problem is, well, now they're married. It's a little bit different, and I just couldn't. It's too simple to have Ben and Julia suddenly come up with another treasure hunt and all that. And I don't know quite what to do. I have written another novel, but it's an entirely different novel, different approach, different theme, different feel to it, and that's I haven't published it yet. I'm thinking of doing it, but I haven't done it yet. I would like to have it out, but it's not here yet. The other novel is called All Our Yesterdays. It's taken from that line in Shakespeare's Macbeth: tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools away to dusty death. Living well is not always the best revenge. Sometimes getting even in grand style is even better. In All Our Yesterdays, Adam Richter, an undersized 15-year-old orphan sent to live on a farm where his teeth are pulled by 2 vicious boys. He escapes, flees to his hometown, secures an apprenticeship with a furniture mill, eventually gets ownership of the mill, prospers, and then the mill is burned by the 2 guys who had earlier pulled his teeth, and nobody in the community is going to do anything about it. So he decides that he has to leave, and he fakes his murder, leaves behind a scenario that brings death and financial ruin to all those people who have treated him so shabbily. If you like a tale of dark revenge, when this book comes out, you can get that. I'm often asked if I had any help, and of course, everybody who does this sort of thing has help. I had help from my wife, who's a former English teacher and an English graduate at Western University, and then my high school English teacher, Mary Lee Ruddle from Franklin, who is now in her 90s, in her late 80s. she reviewed my book, my manuscript, and I'll show you just a page of her review. You can see the red ink on there and what she's saying about it. Let me read a sentence that I wrote. Listen, he said, still gasping for breath. There is not likely to be anyone on the fourth floor. Let's hide up there. Miss Ruddle's version. Listen, he gasped. There's probably no one on the fourth floor. Let's hide up there. How much clearer and cleaner. Also, a page or so later, I end the chapter. She's scared, Julia said. She thinks she's being watched. She told me to be careful. Oh, shit, Ben said. Miss Ruddle said, you might want to take out this expletive. She put in, oh, my God. And she says, there's a lot of shit throughout this manuscript. This is my late 80s, at that time, high school English teacher, and being candid with me. Any other questions?
Yes, we had one from Jim Bob. Jim Bob wants to know, when did you know you were done?
Yes, when I got them to the end and they went through all that adventure. That's not quite true. I went back and I've revised the book, and my wife revised it. She must have read it 7 times. Many more, she says. At some point, I just said, okay, this is it. The changes were a little here and there, and I just finally had to say, okay, enough's enough. When, again, I had written the book, I'd finished it, it was done, and yet I probably revised it 7 or 8 times seriously. So that's what I knew, or thought I knew. If I had to do it again, there are changes I'd make. Yeah. What else? Any other questions?
We had several questions from Kathy. Kathy writes, had you written anything like this before? How did you learn to write? And what teachers or books helped?
I had never written anything like this before. Well, I was trying to write the mystery. A mystery spun off from the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So yeah, I had done that. As to books, I read everything I could on writing. I got all over the internet with ideas. What were the rest of the questions? I didn't get that. Go ahead. What was it more she asked in the question?
Okay, how did you learn to write, and what teachers or books helped?
Well, teachers were my wife and Mary Lee Ruddle. I never would call anything but Miss Ruddle. They were a big help. I can't recall any books in particular. I have a number of books about writing, but I think you just have to sit down and do it. I saw a note there from Anita that there were some steamy passages there, and how did my wife handle that? She helped with it. The steamy passages, guess I knew a little bit about that because of her. So, what else?
We also had a few other questions. Have you tried writing memoir, and who do you like to read?
Well, I've tried writing. Actually, I'm writing what I call my autobiography for my grandsons, my grandchildren, my grandson and grandsons and granddaughter. I get into that every now and then. It's spotty. I talk about this and I talk about that. That would never be anything to be published because nobody'd be interested in it. I mean, it's not my story. It's not particularly anything anybody's going to want to read. But I would give anything to know what my grandparents thought of their grandparents and the things of their day as they were growing up. I didn't know enough to ask that before they passed. So that's what I'm trying to do for my grandchildren. I want them to know what it was like the day World War II ended, one of the most exciting days of my life. I'm 7 years old, and I want them to know that. And what it was like in school, what were some of my teachers like. I had one I think hated kids, and who were my favorite teachers, Miss Ruddle, of course, and others. And that's what I think not to be published.
And we also had a question from Sam. Sam wants to know, how difficult was it to get the book published?
It's very easy. You just go to a publisher and pick a publisher, and they'll print it up. Basically, what I have is a book. It's what's called print on demand. And so if you there are some books already at Amazon available, but if somebody should order 25 books, you know, they print them out and send them to Amazon. You go from there. It was not hard finding a publisher. The big mistake I made is I picked the wrong publisher, and I think the book reflects. I needed there were a lot of advice I needed that I didn't get. I think you need to research very carefully the publishers on hand out there that will publish self-publish for you. Find out what they offer, what their reputation is, their costs, and most important of all, and I'm not sure how to do this, what they'll really do for you. You need to, I think, consider hiring some professionals, cover designer, maybe a proofreader, someone to help with promotion. And finally, I think you need to get as many reviews as possible. Not all five-star reviews. All five-star reviews look like you're faking it. But you need to get people to write an honest review and say, I like this, I didn't like that, blah, 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 blah. And I have never been able to get enough reviews. There are 22 reviews posted on Amazon, and they're all honest reviews. Only one of them's not 5, it's a 4, and I was thrilled to death when I got the 4 because you know, that's the way it ought to be. By the way, you can find my book. You can check me out on Facebook if you want to know anything about me. I hope not at the post office on the wall. You can find the book at Amazon. It's Kindle and paperback there, and at Barnes & Noble Nook, and you can order the book at Barnes & Noble. So you just go to Amazon.com, type in The Secret of the 48th Foot, and you'll see the reviews there, and you can order the book there. If you're going to publish, I think you need to be careful. I think you need to publish both print and ebook, and even consider an audiobook. I didn't consider an audiobook because of the cost, but half my sales are ebook, Amazon Kindle, and curiously, I get the best percentage of return there. So you need not just go with a hardbound or in my case paperbound book, but you need to go to consider very carefully going to an ebook. Other questions?
Yes, we did have one from Suzanne, and Suzanne wants to know, is there more to Ben and Julia's story?
Well, I'd like to think there is, but as I say, I haven't been able to come up with it. I haven't been able to push it forward. I need to get them involved in something big time and even possibly dangerous, but I don't know what. I haven't been able to go there. I've thought about it. I've really, really struggled with it, but I've not been able to come up with anything for them. You know, if you read the book, I mean, there's something there. There's a backstory to them, and then there's a story with them at this time and afterwards. And as I'll blow the cover to some of you, they do get married, and which means they survive. But yeah, it's a little steamy along the way. Yeah. What else? Other question?
I had a few questions for you, Jack. So you have published your first novel after the age of 80. How would you say this has been a unique experience for you? And would you say it's been easier, more challenging, or something else?
I don't think the age made much difference. You know, writing the book when I left Charleston, I put it aside for probably 38 years after I moved up here. but I don't think it was any more difficult writing in my late 70s than it was in my late 40s or early 40s. If I had to do over again, I probably would have plowed ahead, but I didn't have any trouble simply because it was my age and all that. I'm often asked. I didn't model. I said I didn't model any characters after anybody I knew, but I'm often asked. Ben and Julia are WVU professors, and Julia is a law professor. Were these characters inspired by anyone you knew? And the answer to that is no. I do say in the book at one point that Ben is. Well, let me just read a statement here. Ben in this book has just sent Julia into the Wise Library at WVU to get some books about Braddock's expedition and about and the diary of George Washington. And he's waiting there watching to see if she's being followed. And while Julia's in the library, I tell a little bit about Ben Torini's past. It's my way of introducing Ben, my reader. I end up with, he turned down 2 jobs before receiving an offer from Western University, specialist in U.S. history. It was not a glamour field, but one that suited Ben just fine. Now, after nearly 20 years in the classroom, Ben was a tenured full professor, just about the closest thing in society, nirvana. Now, I can attest to that, having been tenured full professor. By the way, where's Julia? Shouldn't she be coming out of the library by now? Ah, there she is. Julia emerged from the library carrying the briefcase Ben hoped contained the books she had checked out. It was only then that Ben noticed a figure step out from the shadows and follow her. It was the same man Ben had spotted watching Julia at the lair that morning. Julia must have noticed the man at the same time because she quickened her pace and then broke into a run. The man behind her also began to run. Just as she reached the top of the stairs in front of Clark Hall, he caught her, grabbed her shoulder, and twisted her to stop, dropping to the wet pavement. Ben flew out the door and ran toward her. He heard the man growl, "There now, little girl, what you running for?" The man spoke in deep grunts, almost inaudible. Give me them papers and you won't have no more trouble." He snatched at the briefcase. Julia jerked the briefcase away and swung it at him, swatting him sharply against the head. The briefcase burst open and books and papers spewed onto the sidewalk. The man flinched back and reached inside his jacket. His hand flashed out and pointed at Julia. He was holding something dark and shiny. It was a pistol. What I'm trying to do, of course, is set up. That's the end of the chapter. I want you to be able to say, well, I'm going to read in this chapter, I'm going to go to bed. And you read things, well, I got to find out what's happened. So you go to the next chapter. And the next chapter is about the organization of the battalion of right-wing guys and how they're being called onto active duty. Jordan leaned back in his chair, awaiting the signal to go on red alert. His pulse was racing and he was having difficulty concentrating. God, this is exciting. This thing works out as planned. We're going to have all the money we need for the revolution. He looked at the picture of Timothy McVeigh taped to the wall on his left. The words of Patrick Henry flashed through his brain. "Give me liberty or give me death." "Timothy," Jordan said softly, "we're going to avenge your death. There'll be a great many dead followers of Zog in the New World Order before it's over." "Well, what are they doing?" "Well, then I end the chapter. Now I'm back to Julia coming out of the library." The man had his back to Ben and concentrating on Julia gave no sign he knew Ben was there. The man whipped out the pistol. Ben leaped on his back, forcing him to the ground with a dull. The gun, which he had brandished in his right hand, went scooting off onto the sidewalk beside Julia. She grabbed it, swung toward the man who was now scuffling with Ben on the wet pavement, and shouted, "Get up or I'll shoot." One swift motion, the man wrapped his knee into Ben's groin, grabbed one of the books from Julia's dropped briefcase, scrambled to his feet, dashed through the door of Clark Hall. Julia shoved the pistol to her right pocket and rushed over to Ben. "Are you all right?" We leave there, and then it goes over and they go hide and so on. I was trying each chapter to get you there and then stop, and when you still wanted to read, and to some extent pull that off. Other questions?
Yes, I was wondering, do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Yeah, write the book. It's amazing. 80%, I'm guessing, 80% of the people in this country have an idea for, you read a book and say, "Oh, I can do better than that." You need to just sit down and write it. It's going to be The a great bestseller? Well, probably not. It's okay if it's not a great bestseller. It's part of your legacy. I mean, I've got a book that has had fairly decent sales. Never going to make the top list. It's part of what I left behind, and it was fun doing it. I've had more fun with this book than almost anything I've done in a long, long time. It's just that it's delightful to sit down and tell a story and have it fit together and stay there. And I've had an enormous amount of fun with that, and that I wouldn't have had. And I'm just very, very pleased that I did it and stuck with it. I mean, there were a lot of problems. I mean, how to come up with the names? Where do you get people? Where did I get the name Edgar Denway? I don't know. The Brotherhood of American Patriots. Well, I made that up, but there was a right-wing militia group in Pocahontas County back in the 70s, and there may still be somewhere out there. I'm probably on their hit list now. But other than that, and Doodle Cunningham, who was a village idiot in Oakland, who is really not a village idiot. Really, the invisible man, he puts himself. It's been fun doing that. I can't tell you how much fun I've had just telling the story. So my advice is, write the book. Just do it. The reason I didn't write it sooner is I didn't have the time when I was working, or I didn't make the time, which was a mistake. I think the thing I've learned most about writing is that you have to write the damn book. So what if it's not a brilliant bestseller? As I say, this is not my first novel. The first novel is ever going to see the light of day. The other one I'm not going to bring up. Change, which I call it, it's not going to happen. But it's just do it. Just do it. Other questions?
Yes, earlier we'd mentioned your experience with both practicing and teaching law and also an encounter with an East German spy. Could you tell us a bit more about your life experiences?
Well, I think one of the important things about me in this book is that I've always been a student of history. When I was a little kid, I was a student of history. I was always interested in history, and as I mentioned earlier, writing my autobiography for our grandchildren, I remember vividly the end of World War II, and I remember the experience of World War II, what it was like. I remember the day of the invasion in Normandy. I remember I was running up to my dad and said, "Daddy, the invasion is on." And then I had to say, "Oh, what's an invasion?" Because I didn't have any idea what an invasion was. But I knew this was the big news of the day. And I've always been interested in that sort of thing. While I was in the Army, I was very lucky. I was with a command, and I got to spend 3 years in Germany. And my wife and I traveled all over Europe and had some interesting encounters. We were in Normandy on the beaches, and Mila has an uncle buried there. A very moving experience going there. Huge cemetery. Some hint at what we lost in World War II. And that afternoon, we stopped at a service station to get gas, and the gas station owner came out, looked at the car, and I had a red VW Beetle with a USA brought across the back, and he spit on the ground and came in and put up a sign, said, "Fairmake closed his service. He wouldn't give the gas." Well, we were really offended. And that night we were in Amiens, and we went to dinner, and I had a short haircut, of course, military, and had wearing American shoes, and clearly stood out as an American. And the owner came up, and I thought, "Oh, here we go again." And he said, would you like to have a really good meal?" He said, "I remember what you Americans did. I'll lay out a big meal." No, and one day we had both extremes of the French experience with the World War II, and that sort of thing. I was lucky in the Army too to be in a command that I got to try cases. A lot of my colleagues didn't. I had 2 capital cases. One, they were really seriously trying to hang my man or shoot him. Maybe should have. But, he got off for 40 years. Great, firing squad. Milo and I traveled. We traveled Europe inside. We didn't stay in the Hilton hotels and that sort of thing. We traveled. We didn't travel American style. We wanted to be in Europe, and we would eat very often in the Restkeller, of the city hall. Most big cities had a restaurant there. It was very cheap. You could get a meal for $2. And night we were in Munich. I never went to. I was with a missile command, and we had units all over Germany, which meant that I got to travel all over Germany on duty. And so we were in Munich, and I, for some reason, was never in Munich for fewer than 3 days. You know, I always had an excuse to stay in Munich. And we were at the Ratskeller, and I'm sitting there on the side of the table, Miles on the other side, and this guy comes over and sits down, and he speaks perfect English. Hey, how are you? Where are you stationed? I said, Kaiserslautern. And by the way, that was no secret. It was on the back of my car. And he said, well, how many troops do we have in Kaiserslautern? Immediately, my antenna went up. And Milo's across the table trying to kick me to say, don't answer. And I'm trying to think to her, don't say anything. And he grilled me for a while, and I didn't tell him anything. But it really scared me. We left there. It was sort of funny. It was like a bad movie. We're walking along. We're looking in the windows of the stores in Munich, but we're really looking at the reflection to see if we're being followed. And finally, when I got to a phone, these days before cell phones, I called G2 Intelligence and told them about my experience, and they said, well, don't worry, you just run into a guy who makes his living selling secrets to East Germany. That was my experience with East German spy. It caught our attention. Shortly before I left Europe, a case in which I had to learn the location of every atomic weapon in Europe. And that's something I didn't want to know. I wanted to go to Berlin when we were there, and so we took leave, and ordinary, sensible people over there, American GIs, took the train to Berlin. No, I had to drive. So we drove up to, what's the name of the place we started anyway? Checkpoint Alpha. And I walked in, and there's a guy, and he sees I'm a captain, and he says, okay, I want you to carry these top secret papers into Berlin. Well, I immediately, gave us directions, and he said, now, when you see, they change the signs all the time. Here's a map, follow this map. Don't follow their signs, because they'll lead you off the Autobahn, and then they'll arrest you for going the wrong way. And don't speed, don't go too slow. You've got X hours, and this is it. So we left. I told my wife, you got to go to the bathroom, do it now, because we're not stopping anywhere. They said, don't stop. And we took off and drove exactly 100 kilometers an hour. That's 60 miles an hour, which would get us there right on time. I'm up over one rise, and there's a Vopo out there, East German cop with his binoculars up watching. And I figured if they're watching me, they're watching everybody. I didn't know anything, and I didn't want to know any secrets. And I did finally, as I say, at the end of my experience, I learned the location of all the nuclear weapons in Europe, and that was kind of scary, but I didn't want to know that. Other questions?
Our last question this evening is from A. Haight. A wants to know, would you consider putting together a book with various stories you have collected and presented about history and lawyers?
Never thought of that, Ann. That might be, that might work. I've been privileged. I became a lawyer. First, my family ever go to college, and went to law school, and was fortunate to get into the military. Be fortunate in the military. Back in those days, they had the draft, and I knew if I didn't do anything else, I was going to get drawn in. So I took ROTC and got a commission. I was very fortunate there, and I came out, and I did not enjoy practicing law. It was with a great firm, and said, if I don't like it here, I'm not going to like it anywhere. And I became secretary of the state bar. Everybody thought I was nuts. But as a matter of fact, I've had the privilege there and at the law school and on the ethics committee of the state bar and other places, I've had the privilege of working with the best lawyers in West Virginia. I just am so privileged, and there are a great many stories, a great story. I mean, Ann Haight, who just asked this question, your father did the best cross-examination job on me that's ever been done. I'm in court in Judge Hayden's courtroom, and John Haight gets up and said, "Now, Professor Bowman, you're a good lawyer." And then he turns to the jury and says, "Oh, he's a good lawyer, ladies and gentlemen." I thought, "Oh God, here we go." And then he said, started questioning me, and the result was that he didn't touch me. He didn't get near hurting me. He just removed me from the case. And at the end was, well, I was a great guy, probably the most brilliant lawyer ever to appear in the courtroom in West Virginia. But nothing I had to say in this case had anything to do with this case. He brilliantly removed me from the case. And I mean, I've been so lucky to have that happen. And I really enjoyed that. And lawyers I knew along the way who were my good friend George Scott, who became a justice on the Supreme Court. And I mean, I've just been so fortunate, and I might consider that. It might be fun. I'll think about that. Other questions?
Just wanted to say again, so if we are interested in reaching out to you or interested in finding more book, we can reach you through Facebook and find the book on Amazon. Was that correct, Jack?
Yes, Facebook. My Facebook, or my email address is fjbowman@comcast.net, and I'm on Facebook. Not very effectively sometimes, but I'm there. And if you're interested in, I have several copies of the book. I'll send you. But I have. You have access there to me and to the book. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. Great to see so many former students and old friends there. Really have enjoyed it. It's the thing I miss most in my life. I miss teaching. I was really privileged. I've told people I had over 2,000 students, and I had 5 I didn't like. Now I did not like those 5. I can tell you right now, and I can tell you who they are, and well, not where they are now anymore. It's not rocket science. They're trying to please you. You treat them with respect, and I was just very privileged. I had great students, fun. It was fun.
Thank you for being here with us this
Sure.
evening, Jack. We really appreciate it, and thank you all for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon at the library. Thanks
Thank
again,
you very
Jack.
much, and thank you for putting up with my glitch, whatever happened there. I don't know what happened, but anyway.
It happens sometimes. That's just technology.
So, anyway, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all. Bye.